hadn't seen Jake in a few months. He'd been overwhelmed with work, and our usual weekend hangouts had almost stopped. Then, on a Thursday, he called and invited me over for drinks. I jumped at the chance, but I noticed how down he sounded on the phone. By the time I arrived, Jake had already started drinking and was slurring his words. A dark aura seemed to surround him, getting heavier as we drank. Eventually, I asked him what had been going on with him. Jake became even darker, almost afraid. He said it had to do with his job. I never really knew what Jake did for a living. I knew he worked for the city in the tech department and was involved with the CCTV surveillance network, but I had no idea what his day-to-day tasks were until he began describing them in detail. Jake explained that there were thousands of cameras scattered throughout the downtown core, surrounding neighborhoods, and even reaching the suburbs of our million-plus city. His job was to categorize and archive all the incoming footage. Most of the footage was categorized broadly, saved on hard drives, and tagged with long combinations of numbers and letters for archiving. These were meant to be forgotten. It was a massive task, but Jake had designed an AI screening program that detected common patterns in the footage, isolating unusual behavior for further review. The vast majority was unremarkable, something like 99.99%. Then there was the 0.01%. Car accidents, assaults, fights, rapes, abductions, murders. These were stored in a special archive for criminal investigations. And then there was the 0.0001%. These went into a classified archive containing footage of events that were, for lack of a better word, unexplainable. This was called the Pandora Archive. I looked up the word Pandora later and learned it referred to the Greek myth of Pandora's box, a vessel that contained all the evils of the world. It was said that once the box was opened, those evils spread, leaving only hope behind. The name was very fitting for the archive's growing contents. Some footage could be explained as optical anomalies, coincidences of light, or perhaps a few crazies wandering the subway. But other footage defied explanation. This was what consumed Jake's mind that night. He'd been breaking protocol and bringing home hard drives. He was stitching the footage together, compiling recurring oddities and editing them into cohesive sequences. Jake wanted to show me some. It didn't feel like bragging, more like he was carrying a heavy burden and needed someone to share it with. I asked if showing me would get him into trouble, but he waved it off. I said I was definitely interested in seeing what was happening in our city. Jake led me into his workspace, where multiple monitors, towers, and piles of external hard drives were scattered around. We sat down and he nervously skimmed through the drives. Finally, he stopped on one. Jake told me this anomaly was called Link Inspector. He pressed play. On the largest screen, black and white footage began. It showed Lincoln Avenue, one of the city's less scenic streets, at 3 a.m. The camera angle captured the entire length of the street leading into downtown. The street looked empty, quiet. A woman appeared from a side street, walking toward the camera. As she reached the intersection, she turned over her shoulder and seemed to scream. The woman took off, sprinting past the camera, which then cut to a wider angle from another camera across the street. We watched her run frantically, seemingly being chased. But there was no one else in sight. She was alone. She kept screaming as she ran, and the cameras followed, cutting between different angles. The woman ran into the middle of the empty intersection. She tripped, then huddled, as if something massive was towering over her. Her neck stiffened, and she began to levitate. Her body hung like a rag doll as something lifted her by the throat, raising her a dozen feet above the road, in the middle of the intersection. Then her head snapped to the left, and her body crashed to the ground. The video ended and went black. I sat there stunned. Jake saw my expression and said, "You haven't seen anything yet." I asked if that was real, if the footage was unaltered. Was it raw? Jake said all he had done was compile the clips. The content had not been touched. He told me the incident was later described as a hit and run, and the case was left open for more evidence, though that evidence never came. The department hid the footage, claiming it was a camera malfunction. No one outside of Jake and his boss had seen the true footage of the woman's death. Now I understood why Jake had been carrying such a heavy air of somberness. Jake started another video. This one was called Black Crab and was much longer than the last. It began in the subway system at the Walkley station right after closing. Walkley was the last stop, nestled between a new housing development on one side and untouched forest on the other. The camera showed the entire platform with benches and trash cans. At the far end, the tunnel was shrouded in darkness. The platform lights went out, and the station went dark. The camera switched to night vision, and everything became visible again. My eyes focused on the platform, waiting for something to happen. Finally, movement came from the tunnel. At first, it was hard to tell what it was, its movement strange and the footage grainy. But as it got closer, it became clearer. It was a man, but he was walking on his hands and feet, upside down, his back arched and his stomach facing the ceiling. His long, dark hair dragged on the ground, and he wore torn layers of jackets and pants. He moved like a crab, jerky yet fast, as he climbed the stairs. The camera cut to another view, showing the dark hallway leading to the stairs. We watched the man crawl up, then squeeze over the turnstiles, heading for the exit. The camera cut again, showing the outside of the station. The man twisted and maneuvered his body through the locked gate. It seemed impossible, but somehow he did it. Once outside, he surveyed his surroundings, then scuttled off toward the woods and disappeared. The footage cut to an hour later, showing him returning from the woods. He was dragging a small animal, probably a cat, by the tail in his teeth. He squeezed back through the gate, crawled through the station, and disappeared into the tunnel again. Jake saw my expression and told me there was more. He showed me a longer version of the video, which spanned over an hour. Jake had compiled more than 20 clips of the man creeping out of the subway and into the woods. Jake fast-forwarded to the end, where the man crawled out of a sewer in a downtown alley. He made his way to a pile of garbage bags and boxes, then jumped into them. A violent struggle broke out. There was someone else in the garbage pile, hands and feet flailing as they fought for their life. The movement stopped, and everything went still. The man moved about, but the darkness and the clutter obscured the camera's view. Jake leaned in and whispered, "The man's eating a homeless guy." The police launched an investigation after the mutilated body was found in the alley. Jake looked into the case. He discovered the man was believed to be David Fletcher, a lawyer who had been prominent decades ago. He lost everything after a house fire killed his wife and kids, an event he blamed himself for. David's descent into madness was swift. He became homeless, addicted to drugs, and fell into mental illness. The last anyone knew of him was 10 years ago when he threw himself in front of a subway train at the Walkley station. After that, he disappeared. Somehow, David had survived. His back had healed in an unnatural way, causing him to walk in the bizarre manner we saw. He adapted to his new posture and lived in the subway tunnels, surviving off drain water and animals he caught. That was the official explanation. But Jake said that was just the investigators' version of events. No one really knew the truth. David was never seen again, and he didn't appear in any more footage from the subway. Jake plugged in another hard drive. He poured a fresh drink and told me this was the one that had been troubling him. The file was called Cloud Mirror. I wasn't sure I wanted to see it, but before I could object, Jake pressed play. All the monitors lit up, showing footage from 5 different downtown intersections. The time and date were exactly the same. The streets were empty, quiet, no cars, no people. Suddenly, in the center of each intersection, a small glowing orb appeared. It started small, about the size of a bowling ball, and the streetlights around it pulsed with energy. The orb grew, becoming the size of a beach ball. Then it flashed out. The streetlights returned to normal, and the intersections were just as lifeless as before. I asked Jake what they were. He said he had gigs of footage of the orbs and had watched them over and over. He didn't know what they were at first, but then they began to change. Jake clicked onto the next video. The 5 monitors lit up with footage from the same intersections, but now weeks had passed. The orb appeared again, growing to the size of a beach ball, but it began to change. Its surface morphed into something gas-like, expanding into a cloud of dark gray. One of the cameras zoomed in, and I could see the cloud in more detail. It looked like a volcanic eruption, swirling inward, a massive, morphing blob. The clouds moved, floating down empty streets. The cameras followed the cloud as it zigzagged through alleyways and onto new roads. Then it stopped. The cloud hovered in the center of the intersection, then dropped to the ground like a coffin. Its shape remained rigid, its exterior shifting like magnetic smoke. Suddenly, something caught my eye. People appeared down the street. They seemed entranced, walking toward the cloud, as if hypnotized. The cloud grew brighter as they got closer, and the streetlights pulsed. One of the men stepped into the cloud, disappearing. The others followed, one by one, until all 5 had vanished into the cloud. Then they reappeared one at a time. They were no longer stumbling and intoxicated. They walked upright, their movements stiff and synchronized. They formed a perfect circle, exchanging a few quick words, then split off and walked in different directions, their strides in perfect sync. Another monitor showed a larger group of people following the same trance-like pattern, entering the cloud and coming out. Different. Jake stopped the video. I asked him if he'd shown this to anyone else. He said no, not even to his boss. That was a problem because he had a meeting with him in the morning to discuss the missing footage. I asked why he hadn't shown the footage to his boss. This was serious. People were being replaced by something. Jake sighed and put in another video. The screen lit up with footage of a downtown street from earlier this week. The cloud was in the intersection. A middle-aged couple walked nearby, the husband limping slightly. The couple noticed the cloud and approached it, their eyes wide in fascination. They stepped into the cloud and disappeared. A moment later, they reappeared. The husband's limp was gone. Jake turned to me and said, "That was my boss and his wife."